If you're someone who lives in modern society, then you're familiar with the idea of labels, that we tend to label ourselves with different things. And I tend to stand more, as you know, on the fence with labels. I can see what they can be good for us, and I can also see how they stand in our way. And before I talk more about my opinion, I know that you are someone who is more against labels, I guess. So let me start by asking you, why do you think labels are bad? And do you see any positives at all with labels?
It's not a bad thing to label yourself as long as you're careful with the labels or the terminology that you're using. So labeling is good, so it helps identify things and kind of the direction that we want to go into or
Mhm.
the kind of person that we are to a certain degree. Yet, as you've already mentioned, as you already know, I'm more of a believer that labels actually tend to hold us back more than they tend to help us or push us forward.
Okay.
The reason is once you label yourself as something, whether it's a positive or a negative thing, that's already limiting because words got their own limits. And once you say, I'm not someone, for example, who can plan things for the future, you've already labeled yourself as such. And then that's going to mean that when things happen and you have to plan something for the future, you won't even try or you won't even be like, okay, I have to learn how to plan stuff for the future. You'll just go like, oh no, I'm not someone who can do
You
that.
just made an assumption and you
And then
wait
you
for
just
it.
keep it. Even though most things in life are just skills.
True.
Skills that you learn, skills that you cultivate, skills that you get to know how to deal with and how to put in task per se so you can get whatever it is that you're trying to get done.
Mhm.
So like for example, you learn how to plan things, you learn how to communicate, you learn how to deal with your emotions, you learn how to ask more of yourself, you learn how to do this or how to do that. But we tend to mostly label ourselves as, oh no, I'm not someone who understands emotions. Even though you can understand emotions, but because you're labeling yourself as someone who cannot understand emotions, they start getting to the point where it's like you don't even try to learn how to understand emotions. You don't even, you know, give it a shot or
Mhm.
anything. You just, I'm not someone who can do this, and then you stop doing this completely. And then when an emotional situation comes up or emerges, the only thing that you tend to do in that case is I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And then of course, so that's why I see it as limiting. It's good to label yourself in a way that will help you determine your strength and your weaknesses
Yeah.
so they can even work on them for the future. But for the most part, we label ourselves in ways that hold us back more than they can make us go forward. So, as an example of that, if I'm going to label myself as something, I would label myself as something for now or
Mhm.
not yet, which means that I am this for this current period of time and it's a work in progress or it's something that's changing with
This is
time.
exactly how it is tied to identity, in a sense. Like that your identity, as we said in the last episode, that
Mhm.
it is changeable and adaptable. And it's the same with these labels, that just because you put a label doesn't mean you have to be that label for the rest of your life. It's something that can change, something that you can upgrade. But I do think if you are someone who doesn't know yourself at all, you're just starting with your self improvement journey or whatever, then I think labels are important. Like, we've talked a lot about personality types and the whole
Mhm.
MBTI system, where you can figure out your personality type and see your strengths and your weaknesses. And that's where you can realize which areas you need to work on and which areas you're already good at, but maybe you can still improve. And in the beginning, that's really important to have these labels that they can give you a direction. The same way where when in the beginning when you read self-help books, it's good to try things even if they are not necessarily for you, just to see where that would lead. It's a direction to push you somewhere. That's where I'm really supportive of
I'm
labels, I
not
guess,
entirely sure because
because you need an anchor in the
I
beginning.
don't know who said the quote, but it's a quote that goes like, maybe it's not about figuring out who you are, maybe it's about forgetting who you are. So the quote means maybe the essence of human lives is not to find out who we are, what we're supposed to do in life, but maybe the essence of the human life is to unlearn all the things that we've learned so far, and we started labeling ourselves as such in relation to what we've learned so far.
It can go both ways.
You know,
I don't think
and
it's
I look at it
necessarily one-sided.
I still look at it like you don't. Like I said, labelizing yourself is not a bad thing technically, if you know how you're doing it and you're using it. But my way of looking at it is the second you labelize yourself as something, because keep in mind the human body, the human cells, molecules, the brain, the neuroplasticity, everything that we've got in our body is something that's adaptable. And it's been proven that once you believe something, your body's going to try to make it reality.
Sure.
Especially if you're going to
manifestation.
look at the quantum physics behind it as well. And then in this example, I'm going back to Joe Dispenza's and his research and all his books and all the stuff that we talked about. In short term, or in summary, so people know what I'm going with here, the quantum physics is once you believe something and once you start acting and behaving as that something, then that something gets summoned from the quantum physics of reality, and then that thing has come to happen, comes to fruition. Exactly. So when you start labelizing yourself as something, then you start believing that something, and then you start acting as if you were that something, and then you summon that possibility from the quantum physics to be that something. But then so I'm not saying that the quantum physics, I'm not that familiar with the concept, okay? I've read a little bit about it. I've heard some of Joe Dispenza's research and shows and talks about it. I'm not an expert in any way whatsoever. But I look at it like, if it is true that we've got a quantum physics and, well, we have a quantum physics, but I'm talking if the studies and the research of Joe Dispenza's is absolutely true, if it is absolutely true, then by that definition, or by that research, or based on that, what we've found so far, is the second you labelize yourself as something, you're gonna bring forth that possible future, that possible outcome to reality, and then you're gonna live in it, because the brain understands. So the brain functions in three ways. If I'm gonna go into a little bit more boring details, you've got the learning, and then you've got the experience, and then you've got the being. So you learn something, then you have to experience that something.
Or another way, you can experience something and learn from it, right?
Yeah, but I'm talking about how you can go from learning to being.
Sure.
So for example, you learn that. I'm missing examples here. You learn how to be more productive. Mm-hmm. Then you experience how you can be more productive.
Sure.
And of course, by experiencing, you also learn
more.
Exactly.
It's a chicken and egg.
Exactly. But then at some point, you kind of you get to the being process, which is you're being more productive. And it's the same as when we labelize ourselves. When you labelize yourself as someone who cannot, we're going to go back to the emotional example, and you're someone who cannot understand emotions because you've never learned that. So you go to experiences. Every time you encounter an emotional situation, you are connecting that experience with the way that, hey, I don't know how to deal with emotions. And then as time goes on, you just be that person who cannot deal with emotions or cannot understand emotions.
So my theory here is, if you try to have this separation, like, for example, let's say you're struggling with social anxiety. Mm-hmm. So that you try to do separation, that your being has faced something in the past that made you socially anxious, but it doesn't mean that your being is anxious. So when you make this separation, you know that this social anxiety can be changed. Like, sure, you made the label, you identified the problem, but you know that it is not something completely related to your pure consciousness, I guess.
Now you're looking at,
it's like this, if you make
1% of the situations. It's the very minority. Because when you
labelize, not necessarily minor, but when you have this separation, that the labels are not gonna take a hold on you. I mean,
yeah, but when you labelize yourself, okay, whether it's in the beginning of your journey or a bit later, most of the time we labelize ourselves as something unconsciously. And I don't mean that you're doing it on autopilot. You're just doing something is happening, you're experiencing something, and you labelize yourself. And then you labelize yourself as that experience. Mm-hmm. And you're not aware of the fact. So right now I can go and labelize myself right now on this podcast. I am someone who is extremely grateful for life and for the experience that I've got. That doesn't mean that I am that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the experience that you go
I don't
through
deny that. Sure.
and the unconscious decisions that you make while you're going through an experience that labelize, that help, or that get you to labelize yourself. And then you have to do some work to realize how you have labelized yourself because of the experience that you've had so far. Or you try to find a way, which I don't have a way yet, to stop yourself from labelizing yourself as anything.
But what if like, sure, in the beginning, labels can be helpful, and you can use that to improve yourself and change yourself. But then at some point, just like so many other things, you have to unlearn these labels. You know what I mean? So does that make them bad? Like, I remember that I used to, you know me, like, since I started the whole self-improvement, you were there in the beginning and you saw how I was labeling myself with way too many things. And now I'm in the process where I'm unlearning these labels. But these labels did push me to the point where I am now. You know what I mean? Because I identified some problems. Okay, I have social anxiety.
I'm not
I
saying
have procrastination issues. I'm a procrastinator, blah, blah, blah. And now I am unlearning these labels that I don't have to identify with these labels anymore. You know, I'm more flexible than that. So I am unlearning these things that I learned in the beginning that were helpful and are now not helpful anymore, just like so many other things.
sure, but like I said, like I don't think that labels are a bad thing necessarily. You know, like I've said, I'm repeating myself here again. They can be helpful in ways. They can be limiting in ways, or I tend to see them as something that's limiting. So, for example, like your journey was mostly labelizing yourself as something. My journey was actually quite the opposite. My journey was like, I don't want to labelize myself as anything. I'm just gonna let the quantum physics, if you if we may, do its job and show me the possibilities of what directions I could go on or paths I could choose. And
Yeah, I can see that.
for me, instead of trying to label myself so I can push myself forward, I just decided that, you know what, I'm not going to label myself as anything. I'm just going to just let go and let things happen to me. Because
I guess it's just different ways to progress in your life, to have progress.
it is.
I don't know.
Like we can keep talking about it.
It's like a tool. I feel like labels maybe are like a toolkit. You know what I mean? Like, you can even direct it about other people. If you want to, let's say, when we call someone who is a narcissist, why it is important to identify if someone is a narcissist, then it is easier to spot them when you're interacting with them because you know what the narcissistic traits are. And sure, it is something that can backfire. You might identify someone as a narcissist even though he is not, but it is still a helpful tool so that you can avoid these people who might manipulate you. So it is something like these labels are things that you can attach to yourself or attach to other people as a tool that helps
But
you.
then keep in mind that we also tend to labelize other people's in a way that would
It could
confirm the way we see ourselves and we see the world.
Yeah.
So
I'm not saying it's a perfect.
I would take
thing,
the
you know?
example that I've mentioned in the last episode. If you're someone who labelizes themselves as a victim, and which is an example from the previous episode again, you're gonna end up labelizing people around you, or people that you meet, or people that you think are not trustworthy, or whatever, as harmful people because they're the ones that are harming you and causing you pain or whatever. Even though they probably are not, you're just gonna labelize them as such because it confirms the way you labelize yourself as a victim. So even when we labelize other people, we don't labelize them as in an objective way. Now, keep in mind, there's many factors here at hand, because that's something that I always look at it. There's the factor, first of all, that you don't know the person very well.
Absolutely.
There's the factor that you don't have their experience. There's the factor that the chances are that they're showing 100% of who they are is like almost 0%. So you're labelizing the person based on the little that you know about them. You're labelizing the person in relation to the way that you've labelized yourself, and in a way that it confirms your view of the world, without keeping in mind that who they are is way bigger than you know.
This ties to another point. So I've already mentioned the things that I think are good about labels, and you've already mentioned things that you think are not good about labels. So there's another point to add here that really ties to the last point you have mentioned, which is labels can really, I don't know what's the word to use here. They can intensify the black and white way of thinking that we have, because when you label someone as, okay, this is a narcissist, and you put them in this bubble that he's a narcissist, and you see them in two-dimensional way, in a sense, in a black and white. He's just a narcissist. He's nothing more than that.
Then you
Maybe
start
there's
also,
more to it.
Then you also start looking for. Then you start getting into confirmation bias and you start looking for how they're a narcissist and start forgetting how they are not a narcissist.
And you start to think more in a black and white way.
Yes, you
do. You just don't see the spectrum anymore, which the spectrum exists for so many things, like related to who you are. Like, you're a good person, there's a spectrum for it. How good are you? How bad are you? You have narcissistic traits, how far are you in that spectrum? Like, things are way more complicated than we think. And if you put these labels, then you start to see things in a very shallow way, and you don't see this complication that is happening. We're very complex beings, and labels can really limit this more middle way of thinking, that there's more to it than you might think. You know what I mean? So I think this is a big downside of labels that I can think of.
Sure. I believe that in general, we just tend to label ourselves and label everything around us because
it makes our nature.
It makes things easier, you know.
The world is so complicated.
Exactly. Instead of trying to calculate and think and this and that, you just label it. Like when you're walking down the street, for example, and you see a red car, just the second that you saw the red car driving past you, you instantly labelize it as red. Why? Because, well, for starters, we've got the observed kind of relationship. So you're the observer in your situation. You are the one that's observing, and you've got the word that that's getting observed by you. And then, so you can identify things as different from other things. We always have to labelize it. All right, this is the red car. This is a palm tree. This is an apple tree. This is this, and this is that.
And objectively, they are not the way that you're labelizing them, in a sense.
But what we tend to forget is, of course, like I said, like in this example, labelizing is good because you're trying to identify what is what and what is not. You're able to tell that, okay, this is an apple tree and this is a palm tree. And from the apple tree, because it's an apple tree, we can eat the apples because apples are healthy. So that kind of labelizing, and objective labelizing for things the way they actually are, is, in my opinion, a good thing. But we tend to forget that humans are way more complex than that. And then we start labelizing them in the ways.
It's the same way. It's the same way that you're labelizing the complex world, you're labelizing the complex humans.
And then we start labelizing ourselves, other human beings, the world, and everything, just because we're kind of used to labelizing things. So we can identify them, you know? It's because you always labelize things, you have to labelize everything. And then when you start doing it to everyone and everything, that's when it starts becoming a little bit more of an autopilot process. And then you start also taking the first thought that comes up in your brain. So you see someone who's, I don't know, say you are on the side of the road and you want to cross the street, and then somebody who just goes like, wee, with the car and just speeding up and everything.
Labels start firing.
Your brain just gonna go like, what a fucking asshole. Yeah. Even though
he's an asshole,
even though it could be many different reasons to why the guy or the woman or the person is driving so freaking fast. They could be in an emergency, they could be an asshole, they could be this or that, but we just are used to labelizing things in like blink of an eye. Yeah. So we don't think about how we're labelizing other people or ourselves in that case. So you instantly labelize the person who was speeding up in this example as an asshole.
Like you can look at it, the other examples, how we have names for other animals, and like we see a tiger, we know, okay, it's a tiger, but there's more to it. Why is it a tiger? Like the structure of their body and this whole complication and details that we don't even start to think about. We just know, okay, this is a tiger. We know basically what a tiger is and what a cat is and what a bird is, but that's it. This is how we simplify things. So we do the same with other people. We have a name for them, or we just call them certain things. As you said, if someone is speeding, this guy is an asshole, this guy is reckless. That's it. This is our label, and then that's it.
Just to bring a perspective into this as well. In this same scenario, okay, where you want to cross the street and a guy is speeding, The first person gonna labelize the guy that's speeding as an asshole.
The
other guy might be like, oh, he must be in a huge rush to get something done.
It shows you how subjective it is.
And then you can labelize one person. Like, we've got, I guess we're about 9 billion people on the planet right now. And if you take one person, you're going to have about 9 billion different labelizations for them. Because they labelize themselves as something, and then every other person is going to labelize them in relation to their experience of life, to their confirmation bias, to the way we view the world, and the many, many factors that are at hand. So, for me, that brings up the question, again, how for me, that leads to the point that I was talking about before, which is we don't labelize things objectively. Because when we're all observing the apple tree, everybody's labelizing as an apple tree. But when you're observing yourself or another human being, everyone got a different label for that.
But this shows you in essence that labels are important, and there are probably things that we can't completely live without. Like we need to understand things, we need to simplify things, but it also shows you that labels are very subjective, and just because you label yourself as something on other people or the world doesn't mean it's true. This goes back to so many things about your perception of reality, about your identity. These are things in your mind that doesn't mean it is the objective reality and the objective truth. So take it with a hint of salt. You can try to label yourself, you can try to label other things, but don't fixate on these labels and make your whole lives revolve around them, I guess. So
I just remember that labels are just labels.
Yeah.
But
don't take them too
in very simple
don't
ways.
get too attached to these
You
things,
know? Whatever you label yourself as, whatever you label the other person as, at the end of the day, it's just a word. It's just your perception. It's just the way that you view the word. And there is the metrics behind all of this, the information, the factors, the data is unbelievably huge, that it's not really that easy to calculate or to understand why you are using these labels. So what I like to do personally, at least, is whether I'm labelizing myself or I'm labelizing the other person, I always like to take a step back and remind myself that labels are just labels. And I don't have to live by these labels, or I don't have to let them determine how I'm going to act or what I'm going to do. Sure, I will, but like when I do this technically, it gives you kind of the space to decide whether you want to believe in the way that you've labeled the other person or not. You know, people call it sometimes intuition. Oh, I can intuitively say whether this is a good or a bad person.
But intuition isn't always right.
Exactly.
Intuition is tied,
because
intuition is tied to your emotions, and your emotions are not always correct. We need to remember.
Exactly. So it's like when you intuitively labelize somebody, you're just doing it based on your experience. And
it could be true, but
yeah, definitely. I'm not denying that it could be true. I'm just saying that for some people they call it intuition, for some others they call it something else. But at the end of the day, it's just labels anyways.
Sure.
And it's good to...
It's just an assumption that you got a hunch, and you're basing your assumptions on that, that this person... And hey, I get this intuition sometimes, and sometimes it's correct. Like, I judge a person from the first time I see them, okay, I'm not so sure. And then with time, I realize I was right from the start. But with other people, I realize I was way off.
Yeah, definitely. So that's how it
is.
I
think it's good to rely on your intuition, but once again, take it with a hint of salt. Don't get too attached to these intuitions, and realize that it's more complicated than that, that sometimes you can be right. Your labels can be helpful. They can be right sometimes, but it's not always the case. Be more flexible, and I guess self-awareness can be really helpful here when you realize that you're labeling something, and just try to keep a little bit of a distance.
Just remembering to take a step backward and try to gain a new perspective or maybe a new mindset about it.
Yeah. So I think that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.